Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. I will just ask my co-hosts that if you see more people who are waiting in the waiting room, can you help me to admit them? Thank you. All right, well, thank you for joining this part of the series of trainings on the 2022 CDBG NOFA. Today, we're going to be talking about the section of the application that is going to be addressed, looking at racial equity and what you're doing in your communities and in your programs to address racial inequities. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. This meeting is being recorded. We've already started the recording, so if you are uncomfortable with that, please do exit the call now. We are recording it so that we can make it available for those who aren't able to make it today, and so that we can also access the questions that you've asked in the chat and respond to those that we aren't able to answer during the session today. If you do have a question, this meeting is not set up like a webinar, it's just set up as a regular meeting. So we're just using the chat function. There is no Q&A function. So to ask a question, click on the chat icon in the user dashboard to submit a question to the team. We are going to, Ann Schmid, who's with our consulting team, ICF, is going to monitor the questions as they come in. We're going to take most questions at the end of the presentation, but if you've got a question that's relevant and makes sense to answer during the course of the presentation, Ann will go ahead and feel free to interrupt me and let me know what that question is so that we can answer it when it makes sense. And as I said, all questions will be saved and recorded as part of the public record. So our agenda for today is that we're going to provide an introduction on why we have this section. We are going to actually just walk through all of the questions that are in the application on racial equity and talk to you about what we're looking for in those questions, talk to you about what's next, what are we going to do with those questions and the answers you provide after you give them to us, and then just sort of put the question back out to you. What are we missing in terms of supporting you as you work in your local communities to address racial inequities in your programs? So I'm very happy today that we've got the support of a team of consultants who are working with us as we are on this journey within the CDBG program to make sure that we are centering racial equity in our program designs. We have with us two consultants from Equity First Consulting, Anna Lugo and Jenny Levine-Smith, and they are on camera right there, so you can see them. And then we also have from ICF, Ann Schmid and Lauren Nichols, both of whom are CDBG program experts and are committed to working with the program requirements, with the regulations, and marrying up racial equity principles with what is actually required and allowed within CDBG and other federal cross-cutting regulations. So we're really glad to have this team who is going to, over the course of the next year and more, assist us in developing racial equity tools that work for our small community partners, our rural areas, and for the specific barriers and challenges that you face in your local communities. So without further ado, I will go ahead and start to introduce the questionnaire and sort of talk about why we have that as part of our application. So at HCD, we have a relatively new mission and vision. Our updated mission is to promote safe, affordable homes and vibrant, inclusive, sustainable communities for all Californians. And our vision is that every California resident can live, work, and play in healthy communities of opportunity. So if we are, as HCD, through our local partners, going to meet that mission and vision to serve all Californians, then we need to use a lens that puts people and communities at the center who have been or are currently marginalized or excluded from decision-making and from access to state and federal programs, including CDBG. And to do this, we need to focus on making changes in how marginalized community members exercise agency and gain a voice in decision-making in project and program design, so together we can overcome inequities that are embedded in our systems. So we don't expect you to have all the solutions on how to do that, and neither do we. This is a journey We want to support you and learn from you and give you the tools that you need to help us at HCD accomplish this vision and mission. This is the starting point, and we are on this journey together. So I am going to go ahead and start walking through the actual questions that you will see when you are able to access the application. Just clarifying point here, the application is not yet available. The NOFA is expected to be released at the end of next week, probably on January 31st, but it may be a couple days after that at the latest. And the application is actually not going to be made available until a little bit after that. We're still in the process of building it, but we have built this section, and so we're able to share the questions with you so that you know what to anticipate. So the first question will look familiar. It was on last year's survey. And it asks, has your jurisdiction completed an analysis of racial disparities in its community, for example, by using the American Community Survey data? And if yes, please let us know what that has been. And if you've completed that analysis, please upload it so that we can take a look. If you haven't, what are the barriers you're facing to doing this, and what support or resources would make this easier for you? Now, I should have said this at the very beginning. The purpose of having this racial equity questionnaire is not to score you or quiz you or find out what you're doing right or wrong, but it is to find out where are you as a jurisdiction in terms of what supports do you need, what work have you done that we can uplift to share with other jurisdictions, and where do you need training and tools, so that we can, over the course of the next year, develop tools that are very responsive to what it is that your needs. So the more detailed answers that you provide, the more data that you give us, the more that we can be responsive in what it is that we're giving you to support this work. So
Felicity, we do have a question on this first slide, and it may be an important one to address moving forward. The question comes in asking if we can define racial disparities.
Sure, I'd be glad to give that a try, and then maybe I can ask Jenny or Anna to help me with that. So racial disparities are differences in outcomes for people, especially people of color. So Indigenous people, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Asian Pacific Islander, Black or African American people who when you look at data across an entire population, that if you control for all other factors like poverty or age or gender or marital status, that the results for people of color are not the same as the people from the dominant class. And we see that this is the case when we look at data, and a lot of this has to do with the social policy, political marginalization, segregation, and discrimination that has happened historically and continues to happen because these kinds of discriminatory systems are embedded in our systems, despite the fact that most of us today would not think are not inclined to be racist in our actions, or to consider people to be of any different value because of the color of their skin. There is inherent racism in our systems because of their history and how they were put into place. So that's where I'll start, and then I would like to turn it over to Jenny, because she can probably state that more articulately than maybe I can. Jenny and Anna.
I think you did a wonderful job, Felicity. And to put it simply, it's just disparities are the imbalances and incongruities, right? If we can control for all other identity markers, we know that when it comes to race, there are incongruities and imbalances in treatment and outcomes for folks of color.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. There are just a few more comments. I'll share these now, but they might be things that we will be addressing towards the end of the presentation. The next one is, can we apply for PTA funding to procure a consultant to do an analysis of racial disparities? And Felicity will address this, but I think the survey right now is just looking for what the jurisdiction has done to date. We'll provide a little bit more information at the end about moving forward. The next question is, can you provide examples of how others are meeting this task? Again, I think the purpose, and Felicity, you can expand, is to collect that information now so that we can share that information. And then lastly, the question, a follow-up to what are racial disparities, is what are we measuring?
So yeah, I think, let's see. So for Tabitha's question, I will have to answer. We'll have to come back and answer that as to whether within this current NOFA, if that would be something you could fund with your planning award. I'd have to let you look. I have to look at the regs. I think it probably is. So I will find that out, and we can learn the answer to that. I don't have it. I don't have that answer for you today. But again, what we're looking at here is just what have you been able to do on your own without additional resources, and that will help sort of inform what we might be able to provide you in terms of planning and technical assistance, so that we can assist you with that work. And then Lori's question, we don't have those examples yet. That's part of what we want to lift up and ask for in this questionnaire. So we don't have the data yet. So that's why we're asking. And then Larry, to answer your question in terms of what are we measuring? So let me give an example here. In fact, what I'm actually going to do is go to question 2, because I feel like the answer is easier to give you because as a CDBG recipient, because Larry, I know you come from the city of Dixon, if your jurisdiction is a prior recipient of CDBG funds, then it has captured race, ethnicity, and income data on its prior program beneficiaries. So completing an analysis of racial disparities in your CDBG programs would be to do something like this. It would be to take the data on who's benefited from, for example, your owner-occupied rehab program, and then to look at the census data or the American Community Survey data for your community, or maybe if you don't have, some communities our grantees don't have accurate data at the community level, but you could look at the countywide level, for example, of across the county, what is the racial and ethnic makeup of your community. And if you had an equitable program, that you would actually, if you were looking at owner-occupied rehab, you might want to look at the makeup of folks who are homeowners, so that you're looking at a like population. You probably also want to look at who's not a homeowner, because that may be very different. And so by even the nature of having an owner-occupied rehab, you're already prioritizing people who are already homeowners. So that in and of itself can be may inform the kinds of projects and programs that you as a jurisdiction want to have locally. But for a simple analysis, it would be look at the universe of your potential participants in your program. So that would be homeowners in your jurisdiction or in your county if your jurisdiction is too small to have the data, and then identify from your program, is there a disparity between who's being served along racial and ethnic lines compared to the population at large. So that would be what an analysis would look like. Anything to add to that statement? And I think this is important to go through so that we're all on the same page in terms of how we define what we're defining here. Anything, Anna or Jenny, to add to how I described what an analysis of racial inequity would be?
I think that's sufficient explanation, Felicity.
Okay, thank you. So we just want to know if you've done anything, and if you haven't, it's okay. We aren't expecting that from you at this point in time. We just want to know if you've done something, if you've started to think about this, and if you have, we want to be able to talk to you and have you maybe do some crowd sourcing and sharing across jurisdictions, because you all are different communities have different barriers, but we can all learn from each other. So if you have done that, please let us know what you've done. If you're facing barriers to doing this, tell us what those barriers are. And then we've provided sort of a list of potential supports, tools, and guidance that we think may be helpful to you, but really we want to know, are these things that could be helpful? So we asked, do you need data sets? Do you need training on how to do data analysis? Do you need technical assistance for specific programs? Is it just a staffing capacity issue, which I think that box might get checked for a lot of you? Or are there other barriers, other tools guidance or forms that would help you to complete something like this. Question number 3 is talk to us about what your success stories are around addressing racial inequity within your jurisdiction. If you don't have success stories to share, let us know what some of the opportunities your jurisdiction has identified for addressing racial inequities. I think that one is relatively self-explanatory, but if you do have questions about that one, please do put them into the chat. Question 4, we want to hear from you about how you are thoughtfully marketing your programs to those members of your community who may not have access via traditional channels, or who may need special additional affirmative outreach in order to know that your programs exist and to build relationships with your local government or the community-based organizations that are delivering services on behalf of your jurisdiction. So identify and describe how people in protected classes, including but not limited to Black, Native, and Indigenous, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, and other people of color will access your CDBG funded program or project. So that is a narrative to provide. And then here are a couple of examples of inclusive program marketing strategies. So you can check all of the things that you are doing locally to market your program. So do you have a fair housing marketing plan in place if you have a housing program? Do you make materials available in multiple languages? Do you make your program materials accessible on a jurisdiction website? Do your program marketing include targeting people in protected classes, including but not limited to people of color? Do you have program marketing on media sites in languages other than English? Are you engaging with community-based organizations that have connections to some of these more marginalized communities to help you with program marketing, or are you doing something else?
We did receive a question to question 4, but it may have been answered here with question 5. Would an LEP be an acceptable source?
Yeah, that's one of the, so an LEP is a limited English, it's actually LAP, so it's limited English proficiency language access plan. So having, as a CDBG grantee, it is actually a requirement to have a limited English proficiency language access plan. And so that's one of the areas we want to be able to provide training to you. And so here are some of the things. If you're making your program materials available in multiple languages, that probably means you're following to some degree a limited English proficiency language access plan. And certainly if you have one, it probably dictates that you should have that to some degree in your local community. So yes, Lori, question 4, describing your LAP, and uploading it would be a great place to start. Thank you. Okay, question number 6, program marketing. If you're not able to carry out any of those items listed in question number 5, what are your barriers? What's causing you not to be able to take on that work? And where could you use support? Here's our talking about the LAP. Do you need help developing or updating your limited English proficiency language access plan? You know, if you don't know what this is, then you can check yes there. Do you need help identifying strategies for program marketing to people in protected classes? Do you need help finding or procuring translators to translate your program documents? Do you need help identifying community-based organizations that work with people in protected classes that you can partner with or to help with marketing, or identifying local media sources that are accessed regularly by people in protected classes? Or is there another area where you could use support? Question number 8 is about representation. So I often think when we're talking about racial equity, we're not just talking about people accessing your existing programs, but rather if we're going to really dive deep into what barriers people face, it's about helping to design and inform program design. We know that this is probably a pretty big shift for many of you, and we want to work together with you to see how we could do this in a way that is feasible given your staffing capacity. What are some creative ways to really center the voices of Black, Native, and Indigenous, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, other people of color, and people with lived experience with housing insecurity, houselessness, and economic insecurity, so that they can help with designing programs that reach people who have been marginalized. So here are a couple of ways that different communities that we were aware of as the group putting these questions together have done this or can do this. So at a very minimum, you can make sure that you are putting information out by following our citizen participation plan. All of you are required to do this, so that one's a pretty easy box to check. Do you have a representative advisory body for community level planning and decision making? And does that advisory body represent the diversity of the community that's being served? So maybe you have special seats for community-based organizations, or for tenants in your local housing authority, or for community residents from a certain group. That it would be one way to make sure that you're on your committees or advisory bodies, that you are having a formal place for the voices of community members who either represent or are members of groups who have been marginalized. Do you have community forums for program feedback, like at churches or in community centers or other trusted places, trusted institutions within your community? Are you making your meeting and planning materials available in multiple languages and accessible on a jurisdiction website? Are you conducting outreach campaigns on social media, on television and radio that are targeted to people who speak languages other than English and people in protected classes? Here's some more options. Are you engaging community-based organizations to help with your program marketing? Do you have community meetings at times and locations that are accessible to community members who might not otherwise be able to attend? Are you holding your meetings in locations with trusted community organizations or institutions? Have you taken steps to ensure that funds are accessible to smaller and non-traditional organizations that serve communities of color, but maybe haven't previously participated formally in government grant programs? So doing this might require a little bit of extra work from you as the jurisdiction to guide these entities that maybe haven't worked in a local government contract before through the process of complying with federal cross-cutting requirements. So if you've done this, what steps have you taken? Have you used your funding to address the organizational capacity of these kinds of organizations, or have you provided other opportunities? And if you have, please describe them. Okay, question 9 is about partnerships. So one way to reach communities is to not do everything, not rely on having all the answers yourself as a jurisdiction, but rather to have partnerships, to engage in subrecipient agreements or memorandums of understanding with community organizations. So this question asks, do you have any formal partnerships like contracts or subrecipient agreements with organizations for people in protected classes? And this would be specifically to serve to meet the program demands in your specific CDBG programs. So that you may be working with these groups and be able to sort of connect. Maybe you're working with them on another project, but you can connect the folks who are who you have community relationships with to the work that you're doing with CDBG, and just use that as a vehicle for getting their input on how you design your programs. So do you have relationships with local community-based committees, community-based organizations, family service providers, resource coordinators or resource centers, community coalitions, local human rights or social justice organizations, or with people of color-owned business consortiums or other groups? And then if you have those formal partnerships, can you tell us about them? So what's the name of the organization? What's the type of partnership you have? And how many years has this partnership been going on? And who are the groups that the community organization serves? And then do you have informal partnerships? So is there an organization that you as the staff, or that your council, or
did you have more of the same crap? But it's helpful.
Okay, just somebody was talking. I put them on mute. Okay. So do you have organizations that you tend to go to to solicit feedback, or that you send your flyers to, and that you engage in an informal way. So you don't have a contractual relationship with them, but you have a relationship. So tell us about those. So it's the same list of types of organizations, but no formal contract, just that you have a relationship with these types of organizations as city staff or as the local city council or board of supervisors. So if you've got those informal partnerships, tell us who those are with as well. Okay, and then question number 13 is about requirements that you have for your subrecipients. So this is probably a more advanced question. So if in fact you have done a racial equity analysis and you've identified racial disparities, are you then putting in place either a plan for, in this case, it's for your subrecipients. So do you have a plan in place to say, okay, we have observed that in our food bank, I'm just going to use this as an example. In our food bank, we've noticed that while there is a large indigenous Latinx population who are immigrant farm workers, we see that population makes up, based on the census data, that population makes up 30% of our population, but we're only seeing that 12% of the folks who come into our food bank are identifying as Latino, Latinx. So what are you doing? That would be something to identify as a disparity. And then if you were doing this, you would have with your subrecipient with your food bank, that's your subrecipient, for example, you'd say, what kind of work are you going to do to make sure to see if you can start to overcome some of those barriers that those folks are facing to accessing this program? And then they put a plan in place, and you would analyze the data after that plan had been in place for a period of time and look at the data again and see if the plan was working. So that would be an example of a plan. So if you're doing that, tell us about it. If not, what would help you to do that? Question number 14 is about what we call affectionately MeBe-Weebie. So that stands for minority business enterprises and women-owned business enterprises. Those are terms used in the regulations at 2 CFR Part 200. That is a federal cross-cutting requirement that for federal contracts, you must take affirmative action to contract with small and minority-owned firms and women-owned business enterprises. So HCD doesn't require set-asides or participation quotas, but you are required to make special efforts to award contracts to minority and women-owned businesses. And so we are asking here, this is not a quiz, this is not a test. We really just want to know, what is it that you are able to do? What are you currently doing to comply with this regulation? Want to lift that up if you're able to do it, and then find out what supports you would need to be able to do this better. So there are a handful of questions here about what it is that you're able to, what are you doing currently to ensure that when you do solicitations, you are including minority and women-owned business enterprises? So are you ensuring that they are solicited whenever there are potential funding sources or bids or bidding opportunities? Are you sending them invitations to bid? When feasible, are you splitting up the requirements for your scope of work into smaller tasks or quantities so that you could maximize participation by small businesses? Where the requirements of your work allow you to do it, are you establishing delivery schedules that would encourage participation by small businesses and minority women-owned businesses? If any of your if you have any subcontracts that are going to be executed under a prime contractor, are you encouraging the prime contractor to take those steps? Are you setting aside a percentage of your CDBG funds that you want to award to minority women-owned business enterprises? Or are you including minority and women-owned business enterprise criteria as additional points in your selection criteria when you are engaging professional services?
We do have a question on this. It's a little bit more geared towards just the general requirement of meeting this. So the question is, if an organization does not have the staff time to train a subrecipient who does not have experience working with public contracts, what are some suggestions for staffing this requirement? Typically, readiness is a factor in deciding which activities to move forward.
Right. So that's a good, see, this is the kind of question, Bridget, that we want to work through answering. I don't have an answer for your question here, but this is the kind of thing that we want to be able to, I would just write that into your answers in your questionnaire as a barrier. That's causing a barrier for you to be able to engage those contractors because they don't have the expertise that you generally require, and is a reasonable requirement for a subrecipient to engage with you and do the work. So please list that as a barrier to engaging those contractors, and we'll work through it.
And then Larry also has a question. How do we interpret make special efforts to award contracts to MeeBee-Weebii, end quote, especially if we are including them in the solicitations? How does this relate to the selection of best qualified?
Okay, thanks for the question, Larry. So some of these, I think maybe you put the question in there before we went through the options, but these are some of those make special efforts options here. Splitting up your contract into smaller components, requiring your subs to take those efforts. Just there's the state clearinghouse for minority and women-owned businesses, making sure that you post the information there. And I think those are the affirmative steps to take. I think just making sure that you're not just going back to the same contractors that you've used over and over again, and you're making sure that the word is out, and that you are making that you're, this is more training that we need to develop and prepare for you. But I think, making sure that the wording and the language in your bids is not overly prohibitive. It's only, it's requiring the minimums that you need to put in place. So this is something that I think we will work together with. This is where we have a good marriage in the relationship between Anna Lugo and Jenny Lyon Smith with Equity First Consulting, and with Laura Nichols and Ann Schmidt from ICF. With that, we'll sort of push each other. There's the regulatory requirements, and there's the regulatory requirements to choose a bidder who is the most qualified and the most reasonable, and that there's cost reasonableness. And then there's the MeeBee-Weebii requirement. Those things are not always mutually exclusive, and so it's important to recognize that that's not necessarily a barrier. And how do we make sure that we are doing all of this in a way that is fair? So we need to provide training for you on that, and these are really good questions. So for right now, just tell us what you are doing.
So some additional follow-up. Larry did indicate, just a comment, there's a difference between marketing and awarding. And I would agree that, yes, the intent of this is focused on just making sure that we are marketing and advertising to those firms, not necessarily specifically awarding those firms. And then Bridget asks, couldn't splitting up contract into smaller pieces be viewed as a way to get around the procurement requirements? And I think, as Felicity just recently articulated, there are lots and lots of federal rules and requirements that may overlap. And so we're constantly balancing what is the appropriate and correct approach. And I think that when you split things out, it needs to be split for, a reasoning that makes sense for services that might be more accomplished by a smaller firm, but not necessarily for the purpose of avoiding procurement. So I understand the comment as it could be something that could lead to that impression, but that's not the intent of the suggested action.
And again, we aren't asking you to say anything here. What we want you to check in terms of the boxes in question 14 are, what are you already currently doing? We want the data to say, we want to know if none of you check the boxes of when feasible divide the total requirements into smaller tasks, or where requirements permit established delivery schedules that encourage participation by small businesses. We want the data from you. That if none of you check this box, then we'll analyze that and say, okay, what's coming up here? Why aren't folks doing that? And then again, if you need support, I'm just moving on to question 15 here, but if you need support to expand your efforts, tell us what support it is that you need. And if you need guidance on how to make sure that how to balance that, making sure you're not skirting procurement requirements while also making those opportunities available, tell us about that.
Yep. And this is a great place to add the next comment that came in that said, when writing our barriers, should we address all the steps that you have listed that we cannot achieve? For example, splitting work into separate tasks is not something that we are allowed to do with our financial department due to their regulations. So I think either the narrative in 15 or the previous narrative in 14 would be appropriate places to provide that information to the state.
Absolutely. Thanks for all these really good questions. We'll take these questions, and that'll be part of what we use as well for our trainings. So this is again an information gathering piece of the application, and we're just taking you as a captive audience who's required to complete all of this so that we can get the data, so that we can give you the tools. Okay, this next section is on section 3. So those of you who have done any kind of construction projects are likely familiar with section 3, but I'll just recap it for those of you who are not familiar. So section 3 of the Housing and Urban Development Act of 1968 requires that economic opportunities that are generated by certain types of financial assistance programs be directed to low and very low income persons. The priority should be to those who are recipients of government assistance for housing, like those like households who are recipients of housing choice vouchers, and to business concerns which provide economic opportunities to low and very low income persons. And I think there's some definitions around that we can get it that are more detailed, but it's lower income people who live in the community that is being served by the contract. So section 3 projects are projects that where the project has a dollar amount of more than $200,000 that are construction projects. So this would include housing rehab projects, housing construction projects, or other public construction projects that are assisted with HUD funding when a total amount of assistance, so not just the CDBG assistance, but the total amount of HUD assistance exceeds the threshold of $200,000. So this includes projects that are financed in conjunction with other funding sources. And so there's information about section 3. That's the current information, because section 3 just changed. There's current information in our grants management manual in chapter 5. We can put a link to that in the chat in a moment. So a local government that receives CDBG funding for these types of activities, for construction activities, is responsible for complying with section 3. And they have to also make sure that their contractors or subs are compliant. So this is a mandatory requirement. But again, the questions being asked here are just sort of about we assume you are meeting the minimum thresholds here, but there's a lot about sort of the spirit of the law and what could you do to really make sure that this is you're maximizing the extent to which you can meet section 3. So there are a couple of actions that we want you to check if you're taking any of these actions. So they include notifying section 3 workers and business concerns about jobs and contracts generated by section 3 covered assistance so that they can submit proposals for the contracts or the job openings, notifying potential contractors of what they're responsible for compliance with under section 3, and then including section 3 language in all of your construction contracts. These are other elements that you could include in your procurement, requiring your subcontractors to meet the requirements of the section 3 law, which is found at subsection 75.119, regardless of whether that section 3 language is included in their agreements or in the rec program regs. That you're documenting action that you've taken to meet HUD benchmarks. You've responded to section 3 complaints. You're submitting required section 3 reporting when you're closing out your grants. At the moment, this is actually not contained within eCivis. It is contained in an external report that we are doing, but we're working towards doing this as the state. Are you publishing your opportunities in newspapers and including in other languages? Are you using good signage about the project in the project area in languages and including in languages other than English? Are you putting out notification of training or employment to neighborhood and nonprofit groups? And are you communicating about these opportunities to employment agencies and career centers? Or what other action are you taking to be compliant with section 3? So we want to know, again, what are you doing to be in compliance? And then again, where could you use some support? So I'll pause there though to see if there was were there any questions, Anne, on the section 3 components specifically that I just went over?
No new questions came in, and I'll go ahead and provide a link to that chapter 5 in the chat, just so everyone has it.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I've been talking about this as we've gone along, but as I've been saying, we're going to use the data that we collect in this survey to help improve resources for all of you. We will be developing trainings based on the responses, and then we also we know as HCD that we need to have compliance. We need to do a better job of providing you with the tools and promoting compliance on various requirements, including your limited English proficiency language access plans, in section 3 compliance with procurement requirements for minority women-owned businesses, and then in addition to that first bullet and the last bullet, we also want to provide you with some best practices for completing a simple racial equity analysis for your programs with data that you have at your fingertips. So not something that requires having a data analytics person on your staff, but rather something that you as a CDBG program manager, who's probably wearing multiple hats, something that you could do with the data that you already are mandated to collect, and with the American Community Survey data that is made available, and what support can we provide to you so that you can sort of take a look at who you're serving and who might you be serving and who might you be missing in your program. And then again, and then also for that last bullet, what could you do that goes a little bit beyond what maybe you're currently doing in meeting the minimum citizen participation citizen participation plan guidelines, so that you really are truly listening to the voices of people who are marginalized in your community when you're making your program decisions and designing your programs, deciding what programs to apply for, etc. So I think I've said this before too, but we don't know your community the way that you do. We don't know what barriers you're facing. Only you know that information, and so we need you to tell us this. And this is I know we've done a lot of questionnaires, we've done a lot of surveys, but we tried to design these questions so that they were new and so that you could really tell us what it is that you need from us. So tell us what you know, what you're currently doing, and what you need help with. You don't need to produce any new documents or start doing something different right now as a result of this questionnaire. You will in the future, and this is sort of a signal of where we're going, but we need to give you the tools to get there, and that's why we're asking you the questions. So we'd like to hear any questions that you have about the questionnaire, and also just let us know what else you need from us to share your work, to share your barriers, to identify the tools that you need to address racial inequities in your community and in your programs. So I'm happy to take any questions. That is the end of the formal part of the presentation, and now we can kind of run into a Q&A.
Great. So Jim does have a really good question about resources. He says, does HCD have an archive or file or web page with all of the CDBG related documents that have been translated into Spanish and other languages at the state level?
Jim, not to my knowledge, we do not. I believe that within the grants management manual that is available online, there are a handful of documents that are public-facing documents that are in Spanish and English. We also have we have a sample public noticing for the citizen participation plan that is available in Spanish, but we do not have all of those documents. So that's something that we can, with ICF on board, that may be I believe we have that in their, I think that's in their contract, is to do translation. So that may be something that we are able to develop in terms of tools. And I don't know what other languages we would need to also include. Spanish is probably the most dominant across the state and in rural areas especially. But that is not something we have universally available. It's a little bit of a mixed bag.
There are currently no other comments in the chat. Oh, one just came in. Let me just read this one. Jim has a great question here. In our service areas, making services available in Spanish-speaking folks is a barrier. Sounds like HCD doesn't have an archive. Right. So that is something that, as Felicity said, we will, hope to address and hope to improve. Janet's asking for the Spanish version of the public notice template.
Yeah, I'd have to dig it up. I know that it is in the appendix. I'm not remembering the appendix number, but I believe it's in the appendix for the most recent NOFA. Janet, if you send, Roxanne might be able to access that easily. I think she's on. We will try to. It's hard for me to do things while I'm on the call, but if you send an email to me, Janet, I'll get you the link to that. It's in the eCivis solicitation pages.
I added a link that might
There we go.
I'm just on the general management manual, so I'm not sure if there's something more specific to this NOFA, but that is Appendix 4.1 is sample notice, English and Spanish.
Okay.
All right, it looks like Kristen has a question. We are in a rural area with very little diversity and resources, which makes it difficult to meet these requirements. Assistance for us rural areas would be great.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. That's. I hope that the questionnaire is designed so that you can tell us about those resource barriers and what would help you. Please feel free to use all those places where we have other. If what we're asking doesn't get to what it is that your particular barriers are. And we do know that there are places in very rural California where there are less people of color. That's not an accident. That has a lot to do with with a history of segregation and discrimination, and where people were sent or were obligated to go at certain periods in our history. And so, it's kind of, it's not, none of us who are here today, it is none of our fault. But it is our job as public servants to make sure that we are overcoming those inequities that are created by historic policy. So that does look different in rural areas, and I don't have all the answers, and that's part of why we have ICF and Equity First on our team, so we can really learn what that looks like. What does that look like to address racial inequity in an area where there is where the population is sort of pretty monochromatic.
Another comment, Susie just adds that lack of people of color in remote rural areas is also due to a lack of resources that larger jurisdictions have and small communities do not.
Okay, we'll wait a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in. We look forward to receiving your responses to the questionnaire. And if you have further questions or concerns, once you get to the application, you know where to find us. The easiest way to get answers is to email the CDBG inbox, and I'm going to put that in the chat, cdbg@hcd.ca.gov.
So there's a new question comment about question number 8, representation and decision making. Are we to assume that there is representation on a board simply by assuming that someone is of a particular race?
Great question, Bridget. I will attempt to answer that question. I would love for our Equity First consultants to weigh in on that as well. My response to that is no, that is not, you should not assume that there is representation on a board simply by assuming that someone is of a particular race. We shouldn't make assumptions about how someone self-identifies. I think that what we're more looking for is whether or not there is representation on a board by someone who is representative of a community organization or of a particular community group that is, sort of maybe has in their mission statement or has as part of their identity that they are representative of a particular culture or ethnic group or racial group. Anna or Jenny, do you have anything to add to that?
I think that the important piece here is that if we're making assumptions, that means we don't have the relationships to be able to have that knowledge. It also means that then we're not really representative, right? So the most important piece here is to think about who do we actually have relationships with, and we want to think about it expansively. I know that we've been talking about racial equity, and there are many other identity markers. Felicity mentioned earlier that it could be a tenant, right? There are many other ways in which folks identify, many other life experiences that folks bring to the table. I think this also addresses the concerns for rural areas, even if you may have small communities of folks who may identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color. You have folks who have many different types of life experiences and identity markers. And so it may be, Felicity, also that we may want to do a little bit of capacity building and understanding what diversity is and what these identity markers mean. And then also on how to mitigate unconscious bias so that we are really understanding what we mean by representation and how to build these relationships.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, so Bridget, just to get that's very helpful. We anticipate doing a series of trainings so that we can all sort of get to the place where we have a common understanding of what we mean by various terms that we're using, and so that we know that in our role as government officials, what our unconscious biases may be, and what barriers are we putting in place for people unconsciously. And so I think that's part of collecting this information from all of you is the starting point, and then we'll be rolling out some of those trainings so that you can get that information and have that inform your work.
I don't
Great.
see any additional comments at this time.
Okay. I think we are 5 minutes before the end of our meeting time together. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who joined, and we look forward to your responses, and we look forward to to learning together with you and being on this journey. Any closing remarks from any of our other speakers? Okay. Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you in our other CDBG 2022 NOFA workshops. Take care.